of Business there, and also special assistant to the university for interfaith programming. She is, as many of you know, the former associate dean at the university's Rankin Chapel. I want to give a huge thanks to her, and also a shout out to our sponsors, the Religious and Spiritual Life Office at Bucknell University, Religious and Spiritual Life and Contemplative Practices at Vassar College, Axel, our new combination of NACOC and Akura, which is the Association for Chaplaincy and Spiritual Life in Higher Education, and the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Kanika. We're going to stay to our practice of finishing up after 20 minutes. And we're thrilled to have you with us, Kanika.
Great. Thank you so much. I am glad to be here. Thank you all for thinking of me. It is a pleasure and a privilege to speak to you all once again. I will go ahead and dive right in. So my first practice, honestly, is find humor where you can. And if I can get this video to work, I'm going to play it really quickly for you all and take 2 of my minutes that way.
Interactive series. Today, I'm going to be guiding you through the world of webinar etiquette. First things first, let's dress for the meeting. Remember, this is still a meeting. You want to look professional. Dress for the job you want, not the one you have. You look at the first slide and what's wrong with that? Don't forget to check your camera angle. I don't know if you know this, but webinar cameras tend to add 10 pounds, double chins, greasy skin, zits, and graying hair. You're doing great. We're moving right along. Beware of the background noise. This is a big one. Remember, that mute button is going to be your best friend. Tracy, you got to come here. You got to come here. No, the idiot's back off. Yeah, he's so dumb. Yeah, he probably thinks Carol Maskins didn't kill her husband. Right in line with the last one, remember the camera is always on. Don't do anything you're going to regret. All right, moving on. Here's another biggie. Be aware of your surroundings. You know, there's a lot of information and different things going on in the background. You might want to double check it before you jump on that call. Yeah, if you look at the slide, you can see our quarterly numbers are going to look pretty good. Lastly, probably the most important, test your equipment before you start. That's the sign of a true pro. This is bullshit.
All right. So one thing, you know, as I was thinking about this is that in a lot of ways, I feel like I'll be stating some things that are obvious, but I do believe that at times we have to affirm ourselves in the obvious, and we have to remind ourselves of the obvious. And so a couple of little things beforehand is finding humor where you can. And I, of course, laugh out loud normally when they get to the part where the lady walks behind him and sits on the toilet, because that is our new reality. But then secondly, remembering that the world is at your fingertips. One of the things that I have found to be truly enjoyable is the stuff that I normally would have had to travel and schedule to see has been brought right to my computer screen. And so there are opportunities to connect myself, my children, and my family to all sorts of things that we never would have been able to do for free at home before. And then thirdly, deliberate connections, and particularly within the university environment. One of the things that I have been very much emphasizing is deliberate connections. We often bring each other in to talk about relevant topics and to share our skill sets. But in this day and age, we need to really validate people's personhood and just affirm the fireside chats, the opportunities to spend 5 or 10 minutes just talking and listening to someone in terms of their personal lives and not just about their professional skill sets. And so just some of the little things to make sure that we're remembering. Secondly, home and family. Beginning to ask this question: who can you spend time with that you didn't have enough time for before? In this DC metro area, we spend a whole lot of time commuting. Everything is at least 45 minutes away from every other thing. And so not having an hour and a half plus daily commute has freed up a lot of time in my schedule to have time for people that I did not have the time for before. How can you be present for loved ones in ways that you weren't before? How can you safely go to break up the monotony of home every day? Where can you go? Are there walks through the neighborhood? Is there an opportunity to sit at the window? We've been stargazing a lot more, watching the stars at night and enjoying the ability to see them. And then also what we can order in. You know, the favorite restaurants all have carry out and to go things now, movies, activities. As I said before, all of the favorite places we used to go, many of them have now brought online some of their shows, whether those are from New York, things we would do for theater for the kids, or things that we would do locally in terms of museums and allow us to enjoy together. So home and family is one of those things that I know we've been emphasizing, but it's important for us to reemphasize and ask those questions. Next piece that I would emphasize is self-care. We're going to go a little bit deeper into meditation, spiritual practices as our short time together continues. But part of it is exercise, and it doesn't mean that any of us are going to turn into bodybuilders, but what are some of the things that we could be doing that, once again, we didn't have time for before in terms of taking care of our bodies. Second piece of that is boundaries. Remembering that in this environment, it reminds me, honestly, on many days of my time being self-employed, and it reminds me so much of what ministry looks like, where the boundaries just collapse because people don't schedule the high points and low points in their lives around what's convenient for us. And it means that we are often taking the work home with us and therefore can't ward it off to the four walls of our offices. But reinforcing some of the boundaries and understanding that in this space, one of the things that all of us are much more aware of is that there will be a tomorrow and some of these things can wait. And so reminding ourselves of that quite regularly. Fourth on this list is breaks, both the scheduled and unscheduled breaks. This goes back to, honestly, what I said before. And so, yes, there is a theme through this, home and family, that we are all together. We have nowhere we can go. So we schedule in breaks to be able to interact with each other in ways that we wouldn't have before. Whereas we used to have to wait for the morning and the evening to be together. We can do that throughout the day as long as we schedule it well. And so on certain days in particular, there will be afternoons where we know that there is an hour or more that we have planned for something for us to do together. It goes along with redistributing that work week. One of the things I've done is to try to be very deliberate about Fridays during this time frame. That Fridays, which have typically been considered in the work world the slower days, but in, I would say, probably many of our worlds, we're always the keep it moving because, of course, we're always preparing for holy days on the weekends and all of the other things that are part of the social lives of students on campuses, that Fridays have turned into a much slower day for me. And so on a very rare occasion now is it that I will take meetings on Friday afternoons. And so looking at this and how can you redistribute your work week realistically in ways that will allow you to build in some more of the balance and some more of the lull time that you would not have given yourself permission to do before. And then I'll say rediscovering your hobbies. I used to make jewelry back when I had time on my hands. And so I found myself pulling out some of those old things that I used to do that were relaxing and comforting. And so what are some of the hobbies that you've long since put away and known that you didn't have the time for, but in this new day and age, you can rediscover that time. And so part of the self-care is really rediscovering, not necessarily recreating things that are new, but rediscovering things that you had begun to put down or begun to lose. One of the meditations that I found in my spiritual practices during this time has been to revisit Howard Thurman's Meditations of the Heart. And in this particular one, I thought that I found at least some reminiscence of the times that we are in as it relates both to COVID-19 as well as to Black Lives Matter. And so if you all will indulge me, I'll take just a minute to read it. And you can listen however you would like. If you're a visual person, you can read along with me. If you're an auditory person, you can close your eyes and listen, however it is that it would be comfortable for you. I will lift up mine eyes. I will lift up mine eyes, scarcely knowing it. I have become increasingly self-centered, my mind focused upon all the details of my little life and the endless trivialities of a daily routine. I hover over all my little aches and pains, my petty annoyances, my little frustrations, while the band around my head tightens and tightens until at last I would despair completely. Then out of no place comes sometimes a gentle, sometimes startling reminder, and I lift up mine eyes. The reminder may be a tale of heroism and courage brought to me over the sound waves of the air. It may be the snatches of a melody long ago forgotten, but with it come flooding in vast recollections of other days freighted with beauty and tenderness. It may be a chance telephone call that nets reassurance that what I can do for someone beyond the borders of my place relates me to him or her so urgently that my self-indulgence shames my spirit and chastises my mind. I will lift up mine eyes. I will lift up mine eyes to life, that I may read the guideposts along my way and not miss the important turning in the road. I will lift up mine eyes to love, that I may not close the door of my heart to the knocking hand, the tender cry, the anxious reach. I will lift up mine eyes to God, that I may meet God's spirit, not only in the high place, the great moment, the penetrating call, but also in the byways, the little duties, the stinging irritations, and the sad and bottomless renunciations. And for me, this is enough. What I've found myself in this time doing as we consider sustaining practices in difficult times is revisiting some of these works that have meant something to me, some of which I've forgotten, some of which I remember, and rediscovering meaning in them for this particular moment. And this would be one of those that I have found meaning in, certainly, and would recommend. And so as an extension of that, there's plugging in and unplugging. So of course, finding our cause and finding ways. We have our students preparing to do phone banking this Friday as they are doing some social justice outreach. So plugging in and staying in touch with people who, once again, oftentimes in the busyness of life did not have time for before. Building that playlist of the songs and the melodies that will remind us and reconnect us with what is so important, but then also unplugging, turning off CNN or Fox News, whichever one it is that suits you, and anything in between, and logging off of social media or whatever else it is that we need to unplug from. I will add that there needs to be certainly a reality check as a part of this, because it is a stressful time for us, even as caregivers, that we feel the stress and we carry it. And sometimes we don't have the same opportunities to unload it on someone else because we are the ones on whom it is being unloaded. But to give ourselves permission to acknowledge that it is stressful for us as well. And so as a part of that, don't overload on the news and stats, and recognize when we need to step back and breathe. And so with that, a couple of spiritual practices that I will note that I found to be especially meaningful at this time. One is deliberate intercessory prayer, understanding many of the news stories that we hear, and many of the personal stories that we hear. I would imagine many of you are like me, you are getting phone calls or text messages or emails on a regular basis indicating either someone you know who has been diagnosed with coronavirus or is deceased, or someone who is connected to someone you know, and they and their families are dealing with this. I am sure that many of you are like me, and you have people in your life who are a part of protests and are looking for ways to sound their voices in the midst of the George Floyd aftermath and the I don't want to call it a new, I would say the new revelation for many parts of our community on some of the stigmas and trials that other parts of our community have dealt with for centuries at this point. And so there is an opportunity for each and every one of us to intercede specifically and deliberately, and to find some comfort in knowing that we have been able to assist in that way. Number two, outreaching to those in need. This has been a time of being very deliberate about recognizing when people call out for help, and then also recognizing those who may be isolated for whatever reason it may be. So from the international students that I mentioned at the beginning of this, who either cannot return to the country or cannot return home to wherever they are from, and are uncertain about that. To the families who are suffering and not able to adequately say goodbye to their loved ones, to those who are struggling with a need to find meaning in the midst of this, to our freshmen who are grieving what they imagined would be the beginning of their college experiences, and are now finding themselves, in many cases, having to experience that without being able to come to campus. And I'm sure stretching forward to even this year's seniors, wondering if they will have the same experience as last year's seniors, and not being able to celebrate a graduation the way they have imagined it for their entire lives. To people who were getting married and wondered, could I invite people to my wedding, right? We have that whole range of realities. And so some of them are obvious, but many of them are not as obvious on the surface, because they are not the direct people who are either impacted directly by death, so to speak, but they are still grieving in this moment. And so finding the ways to outreach to them, for me, is a spiritual practice. And then under channeling energy, I have put 6 things, but they, we can look at them all differently. There are the deep breathing exercises that our community has expounded for time untold. And so remembering to find those times, one, to breathe, but then to share that gift with others when the stress is overwhelming and the busyness and the disconnectedness are overwhelming. 2, the embodied prayer. In this age of being so wed to technology, that it is an opportunity for us, unfortunately, to disconnect with physical reality. And so finding the ways to be able to reconnect with that physical reality are important. The focused reading, which can include Lectio Divina, but on anything, and for me, it's been Howard Thurman in addition to my biblical readings. Journaling, so that we can remember what we are feeling and experiencing and how we are growing and developing in this time. The walks around the neighborhood, I will say, have been amazing for me and for our community and family, as a safe way to be able to experience. And then, of course, storytelling, which the technology has given us so many ways to be able to do that, and to be able to share it either intimately or broadly with those who may be around us. And so I know with that, I am at 20 minutes. And so I will stop and see what is next on our agenda.
Oh, Kanika, thank you so much for that wonderful, rich reflection. I might ask, what are you seeing among your students that they most need right now?
So I will say I have not identified one particular need. I think that it varies by the type of student. Most present, and I guess center to all of them, is for us to engage in active listening, so that we can really hear what it is that is concerning them and then respond appropriately. But for our campus, I mentioned our international students and the uncertainty they're feeling. I mentioned the freshmen and the grief they're feeling. But for us as a community, I will say, even when our university said that 80% of classes would be online, at least 60 to 70% of our students were still planning on coming back to campus. And for me, it's significant to recognize that, because it speaks to what the campus means to them and what that community means to them. And so for all of our students, they are experiencing a grief and an uncertainty around not being able to be sheltered by the campus community that has become second nature to them at this point in life. I think we need to recognize and remember that for all of them.